I'm just editing this video and I've decided to put this intro before the actual start of the video. There'll be things in this video that people will feel quite passionate about on both sides, and undoubtedly local residents, other van lifers, motorhomers, people who car camp, people who like the national parks, people who have negative thoughts about the national parks and the National Park Authority staff, North York Moors staff, and probably other national parks will watch this video, and they'll be checking the comments. And I think there's an opportunity here to use this video to get your comments back to that vast range of people. So if you're from any of those communities or have a comment or an idea or a suggestion, it'd be great to have the comment in this video. And as the video goes on, I'll leave this up forevermore, and if there are more changes, I will come back to you and update you as it is. But I hope you enjoyed the video. Hello everybody, hope you're well. You join me on top of the moor. There's the camper van, it's got the Whippets in with the heater on, and we're at Danby Beacon. And we're up here, and this video is about the new no overnight parking signs that have been popping up around the national park. Like this. No motorhome parking overnight. Okay? Now, what does that actually mean? And all it says on it is the North York Moors National Park. And I have been in touch with the national park, and I've asked a number of questions about these signs and other signs that have recently popped up around the national park. And we'll talk about that as part of this video. But just to set the scene, there's my camper van. It's not a motorhome. So if I come in a car or a camper van and not a motorhome, can I sleep in it and park overnight? This is the other sign next to it. No further information. Keep your dogs on the lead, no fires. Information you'd expect to see in a national park. But the national park, all the land that you would see if it wasn't foggy, I'd put some other clips in on a clear day, is privately owned really. The National Park Authority own less than 1% of the national park, which they're always keen to tell you. So this land and many other areas of land belong to landowners, and the majority of those landowners use it for shoots, for grouse, partridge and pheasant shooting. And this habitat of the heather moor isn't that natural really. Originally, time gone by, this would have all been woodland. And over the years, the woods have been cut down and the moorland's been allowed to grow. And this is all managed land, and it's all managed land predominantly by private landowners for shoots. And they either shoot it themselves or they rent places out and make money from it. And there's an example of the landowners, what they do to keep the moorland as heather moor. They burn sections off, and they do that to enable the grouse and the pheasants to have new bud heather that they can eat. And then next to it you'll see longer areas of heather, and there's a rotation so it doesn't get too big, and they burn it every year in different areas so they can nest in the long heather and then eat the new buds of the fresh heather that grows after the fire. But you know, it's just an indication that this is all false land. It's not natural like this, it's managed, and it's managed just purely for landowners and paying guests to shoot low-flying birds, pheasants, grouse, partridge. So there's my camper van parked there. One of the things you'll hear from the national park is that the signs have gone up because people are leaving in a mess. Well, I've been coming to the national park since I was 12. I've been camping in the national park from the age of 12. As soon as I was old enough to get a vehicle, probably 18, I used to come up here and camp in my vehicle. And I've never, in all that time, seen any rubbish being left by camper vans in the national park. I have seen around this area people fly tipping. But I'm pretty sure they wouldn't even fly tip if there was a couple of camper vans or motorhomes parked here, because they'd probably get a photograph or some video nowadays and get caught. Now, I'm not naive. There are people that have camper vans and motorhomes and car camp that undoubtedly make a mess. But they must be quite minimum in comparison to all the other visitors that come to a national park during the day and don't camp overnight. I'm sure they leave their fair amount of rubbish, and probably more so than people that have motorhomes and camper vans. Now, I'm very, very fortunate because I live in the national park. I live in the North York Moors National Park, and I have done for coming up to 5 years. But when I was younger, I lived on a council estate. My parents didn't have any money. My parents didn't have a car, never had a car. But there was a walking group, a hiking club set up that run from the local church. And I joined that at the age of 12, and we used to come up here all the time. And I know many people over the years that I've met here that have lived here for generation after generation. I've got lots of friends up here, and it was always my ambition to come up and live here full time. And nearly 5 years ago, that come true. And me and Jo, my partner, when I first met her, one of the first days we had a long wheelbase full safari Land Rover that was a camper van. When I was, I think I was 20, I brought her up here for the weekend, and we wild camped in my Land Rover. So the national park means a lot to me. I could have lived practically anywhere in the country, or up in Scotland, Wales, or even abroad if I wanted to. But I chose to live here in the national park because I really like it. It's got everything I need. The community's good. The people that I live around are really nice people. The scenery and the countryside is absolutely beautiful. I obviously love the seasons, as it's -2 at the moment and thick ice, and I'm still out. And it's got everything I need. This as a national park for me is ideal. I'm a member of 3 fly fishing clubs, so I can go fly fishing around here. It's got the coast, places like Runswick, Sandsend and Whitby, and I can go kayaking, kayak fishing, swimming in the sea, not this time of year, and I can walk for endless hours with my dogs across the moorland on the footpaths. But the question, after looking at these signs, has made me think about the national park and the national park authorities. And when you start to look into it and ask some questions, it's quite interesting. The National Park Authority spend £4 million a year on salaries. They run a number of car parks around the national park, which I'll clip in this video, that make excessive money for them. They're struggling financially to balance the books. They still have their offer from DEFRA this year. A large proportion of the 170 staff that work for them are on temporary contracts. Many of them are office based. They've just bought a piece of land in Helmsley. That's got quite a bit of controversy with the local residents in Helmsley, where they want to leave their old offices and build a multi-million pound purpose-built eco-friendly building in Helmsley to accommodate the office staff. And the National Parks was established in the Peak District, where the landowners wouldn't let anybody have access to their land. So you had the big cities of Manchester and Sheffield around the Peak District, seeing this amazing, beautiful countryside, and nobody was allowed in it. So there was a mass trespass and a fight between the gamekeepers, landowners and the local residents, and there was an act of Parliament to create the national parks. But has it changed that much really? All the land is still owned by private landowners, and the erection of these signs and other signs around the national park, isn't that similar? You're not allowed to stay in these and benefit from being overnight in these places. And people will come back and say there's many places you can stay in the national park. And there are, if you've got the money. And there are a number of campsites. And having a look, you can actually, the cheapest one I've found is £15 a night to have a tent and a campsite in season. And if that's what you want, that's great. But a campsite, these campsites, if you look at them, they're very well crammed together. There's lots of people there. And for me, and for many people that come out here and enjoy the national park, they're more interested in the isolation and being out in nature rather than just being on a campsite with lots of other people and families. And places like this. So I was really surprised to see these no overnight parking signs across the North York Moors National Park. So I emailed the National Park and asked them some questions, because most of these signs, these new signs I'm showing now, just appeared within days of each other, and they've all recently appeared, so I thought some significant event must have taken place. So the first question I asked is, why have they been put up? Has there something happened? And if something has happened, what evidence have you got in relation to this? I also asked if there'd been any consultation with local residents, as I asked a number of my neighbours, some farmers and even some game keepers, and they didn't know anything about it. I also asked if there'd been consideration of the knock-on effect with this as well, because if you think of it, these areas for overnight parking for camper vans and motorhomes have been used time and time again, and they're well-established sites, and they're out the way. And I asked the question, have they thought through this process? If you suddenly remove these sites, and there's about 10 of these areas that have just recently got these signs put up, you know, people will move into other areas. So if you have a well-established site and people are used to seeing camper vans there, it's somewhat accepted by the general community that live here, obviously not by the landowners. Now if you suddenly take away these 10 different sites, and that equates to nearly 30 camper van parking areas, so across these 10 sites, I've been round each of them, and that equates to about 20 different camper vans you'd get on those sites as a total. Now these people are still going to come to the national park, and they're going to look for somewhere else to wild camp in their camper vans, and the knock-on effect with that may upset some people, because this is going to be in new areas and probably less remote areas, and it could also affect the impact on residents and residents parking. You know, if you live in the national park, there's very little areas to park. So I asked that question as well. I asked who paid for it and what the cost was. I asked who was going to monitor it and what legislation was used. I also asked if there was any planning permission and what processes there was needed to actually have these signs erected. And I'll go through the answers I've got back from this now. So to conclude this video, what's my thoughts and reflections? Well, in the letter you'll see from the North York Moors National Park, it says a couple of things that trigger concerns for me. It says that there's no person or organisation or strategy or words to that effect that are looking to ban wild camper van camping in the North York Moors. But it doesn't feel like that. You know, there's over 10 signs that have been erected almost instantly. I've spoke to lots of local people, including gamekeepers, and they didn't know anything about it. And although what the national park I take as true, there doesn't seem to be much fight back from that. There doesn't seem to be anything in relation to that inclusion of letting people wild camp. And I'd be interested, and I've asked those questions about evidence. And I'd have been interested to see if there was a better process. So if there was a landowner that had said, I really don't want wild camping on my land in those areas that you let people camp during the days because of X, Y, and Z. You know, it'd be good to see that evidence. It'd be good to understand where that problem's come from. Is it fires? Now, as I've done this video, I've been to all of those sites. I've been right around the park a number of times, and I can't find any evidence of scorch marks or burning from within those wild camping areas. I can't see it. But I do know, speaking to the some of the gamekeepers, that their problems are not necessarily with wild camping. There's a number of issues they have throughout the year where people go onto a grass verge and get stuck in usually their car, or delivery drivers, and they have to help them to get them off that boggy ground back onto the road. There's a big issue for farmers with dogs off leads, and only about 3 weeks ago, we're just coming up to lambing season, there was a dog walking on a footpath with their owners. The dog ran off the footpath into a field, chased 40 sheep for about 20 minutes. Most of those sheep will probably have bought their lambs. One sheep had its throat bitten and another sheep had its face ripped off. And thankfully there was a local resident there who collared them and informed the local farmer. And their defence was, well, he's never done anything like that before. And there is an issue from the gamekeeper's perspective as well, that if you're walking your dogs across open moorland, you need to keep them on the lead. You know, I've said in this video that this land is privately owned and it's for shoots. And if you've got your dogs running off the lead, they'll chase the game birds off that particular shoot, which is a problem to the gamekeepers. It also disrupts the wildlife as well. We've got lots of migrating birds, lapwings and curlews that nest, and they'll get chased off those sites, which is no benefit to anybody. So keep the dogs on a lead. I can't emphasise it enough. The other reason for keeping a dog on a lead on open moorland is there's lots of adders, snakes that are poisonous. And if your dog's running around and stands on one of these or goes to attack one of these and gets bitten, you've probably got an hour to get to the vets to get an antidote before that dog dies. So there are lots of reasons to keep your dogs on a lead. Other things the gamekeepers have told me and local residents have told me regarding mess and rubbish being left is that a number of the car parks don't have any facilities. So if you're up at the Hall of Oakham, there's a car park there, and there's no facilities there whatsoever. But you don't have to be in that car park long to see people hopping over the fence into the bushes to use the trees as a toilet. Now, is that getting reflected back on people staying there overnight? Is that part of the issue? Again, as I've driven round the national park on all these sites, I've not seen any evidence of potable toilet waste being disposed of, which is another one that people may suggest, and have suggested in other areas, particularly in Scotland where they've had some problems. But I have seen bits of toilet paper and what looks like human waste. So some of the potential issues that have been labelled onto people with camper vans and motorhomes may well not be them. But there again, there will be people out there that do leave rubbish from camper vans, that do empty their toilets. And we can only challenge those people and hopefully educate those people the impact that will have. Also in the response from the North York Moors National Park, I asked about, do they need planning permission for these signs? And who paid for it and who monitors them? And they said they didn't actually tell me how much it cost. I mean, to put those 10 signs up and bind them must have cost something. It's more than a day's work to actually do that, if nothing else. But the national parks paid for that. So it seems like if you're a landowner and you have an area where somebody parks during the day and you don't want people parking there on a night, all you have to do is inform the national park and they'll put a sign up. Now, the knock-on effects of that are going to be significant, aren't they? Because there's less and less places now. I mentioned it earlier in the video, and this is a key issue that I think needs to be considered. Those signs that have gone up around the national park now have probably removed 30 separate places where you can park a camper van. That, alongside the removal of parking allowed at Sands End overnight for camper vans, and in Whippet and in Scarborough, you're probably going up to about 100 camper van places that have been removed from North Yorkshire. Okay, not all in the North Yorkshire National Park, but I would imagine those people are still coming in their camper vans and motorhomes. And in the future, there'll be more people coming in cars with roof tents. There's a big surge on roof tents at the moment because camper vans are expensive. And you have to have a second vehicle because, you know, you won't generally go to work in a reasonably sized camper van all the time. But if you've got a car and you can put a roof rack on and you can put a tent box on, you can stick the tent box on when you want, come up for the weekend, stay in your tent box. So I don't think the numbers are going to go down regarding wild camping in cars, camper vans and motorhomes. And the removal of those spaces due to the signs going up and the implications of North Yorkshire local authority with Whippet, Scarborough and Sands End, they're going to disperse people, and those people are going to be dispersed into new areas or areas that was less popular. And then the landowners will ask for more signs to be put up, so there'll be less places. And then people will start to move into the villages and areas where residents are, and that will cause more conflict and more problems. The park's big enough, and as it works at the moment, it seems to work well. But I think the knock-on effect of these signs are quite far-reaching, really. Also, the cost of car parking and the facilities on car parks. A number of the car parks around the North York Moors, if you look at the Gothland one, there's a car park there. The minimum payment is £4, and that's for a car or a motorbike. So if you want to use that toilet there, there's no other real parking around there that's easy accessible. It's all double yellow lines or limited short-term parking. You have to pay £4 to use the toilet there. And I don't think that's really inclusive. I think that sort of feels like almost like a national park tax. So there's a number of things related to this that I have concerns about. And as I said before, I have concerns as somebody who has a camper van, other people being able to access the North York Moors, and also somebody who actually lives in the North York Moors National Park. It is a beautiful place. The inclusion side also, particularly from my background, is that if I was a kid again in Hull, living on my council estate in Bilton Grange, I checked if I was to use public transport, it would take 5.5 hours to get to the Danby Centre. And that would include 2 taxi rides as well. So it's not really feasible from a massive city like Hull for people to use public transport to actually get to the North York Moors National Park. So if you come up in your car, from there, if you have a car, if you can afford a car in the current climate, and if you're on minimum wage or a young person on an apprenticeship, that's quite challenging to run a car as well as rent and pay all your bills. But if you do manage to do that and come up to enjoy and love the countryside and the well-being that you get from being out in the countryside, you probably want to sleep in your car, and more people will want to sleep in your car, and that's going to be limited. So there's a number of aspects right across this that raise flags for me. I also think the national park are in an awkward situation. What you tend to find with bodies like national parks and even other government departments, they become self-perpetuating. So they have a very close remit. That remit's delivered. They come up with new ideas. They create more staff. The staff want to keep their jobs. They look to match fund. They look to bring more money in. And that somewhat takes them away some of the key principles of their agenda. Now, the North York Moors National Park have a development plan, and they have a scorecard process, which clearly shows what they're doing against each of those objectives. But in the areas around inclusion, it's not total inclusion, and there's a lot of work that I think could actually be done on that. And the principles of a national park being established due to the mass trespass all those years ago on Kinder Scout that I've talked about is to allow people to enjoy this beautiful countryside that needs to be managed and kept in a beautiful way. So they have a difficult job, but I think they need to refocus, particularly with the funding issues that they're going to have as well. And who knows with this current government and potentially future governments what other targets are going to be put on them. I don't know, and I'm surmising on this, but those electrical power charging points for electric vehicles that have appeared at the Danby Centre and Hutley Hall, I and everybody I've spoke to has not seen anybody use them. But I would imagine that's on a government agenda. DEFRA, one of the funders of the national park authorities, probably said you need to do this. So there's pressure from government, there's the additional cost for national insurance payments and everything. And you know, techies don't vote for Christmas. So if you work for the national park, you'll want, and you enjoy the job, and it must be a fantastic place to work, you're going to be looking at or giving emphasis on how you sustain your job or earn more money in that particular process. And they have 170 staff. Most of them are part-time, and they have a budget to spend on that of £4 million, which is significant. And it looks, from what I can see from the accounts and some of the information, not many of them are actually front-facing. Hence, they're building a new office, a multi-million-pound office, or trying to build a multi-million-pound office to accommodate all those staff that are centre-based. They are looking to increase the volunteers of a national park as well. So if you can't afford to use your budget to employ rangers to go out and do the maintenance and speak to people and support people and encourage people to use the national park, the clear one to save money is to use volunteers. And I know from an experience of being on the national park and being stopped by a national park volunteer who was dressed from head to foot in national park clothing. I was on my mountain bike with my neighbour, and they was mountain biking, and he literally stood in the middle of the path, lifted his walking pole as if he was going to hit me, shouting at me I couldn't ride on this path. I stopped. I honestly thought he was joking. I started laughing, and he wasn't. He was serious. And I said, "What the hell are you doing?" And he says, "You can't ride on this path. It's a footpath." I said, "No, it's a bridleway." I told him the name of the bridleway, and I says, "You don't even know what you're on about. This is a bridleway. You're allowed to ride bikes on a bridleway, and that's what we're doing. I live here. It's actually my friend's land as well as a bridleway." I reported that to the national park, and I reported it just so they knew. I didn't know if this person was a volunteer or employed at that time, but I come back and I got an apology, and they said they was going to retrain that person. But I specifically asked, do you DBS check, clearance check your volunteers? Because I thought this guy was over aggressive. And they come back and said their policy is not to do that unless they are directly working with children. So there's some issues there that they really need to be careful of, because they're recruiting volunteers, not doing DBS and background checks on them, and putting them in national park clothing to represent the national park. And they're looking to get more and more of these, and they could well get into conflict with people, and we don't know the background. Why, if you don't DBS them, you haven't done the checks. So I'm sure it's a very, very difficult job to run the North York Moors National Park and balance all these issues, work with landowners, look at all the building regulations, keep the place safe, tidy, and a natural habitat for the wildlife, and encourage visitors to use it. But I think, due to the things I've mentioned, and particularly the budget side of things, we will see changes in the national park. Another element of that response letter says they understand the demand of camper vans and the vast growth in them, and they may in the future do a review and look at offering some camping sites on some of their car parks, and this would go to planning and go to consultation as part of that process, which would be nice. It's something, I suppose, but it's not being able to be out in the middle of nowhere while camping in the peace and quiet. So although that may happen and may be good, and we may get something like a UK Air as part of that on a campsite, on a car park, I don't know if it'll happen, but if it does, I think they'll be charging for that, and it may be a financial decision that drives it forward more than meeting the needs of people that have camper vans and motorhomes or car camping. That might just be me being cynical, but as I say, they'll be doing everything they possibly can now to look at how they balance the books. One other thing that I forgot to mention was that gamekeepers as well. I said about wild camping, and one of them didn't automatically think about camper vans, and they said they have had some problems, not many but some problems, where people with tents have gone into woodland and onto the moor and set up camp and had a fire. And that is really, really dangerous, because the national park, particularly in the summer if we have a hot spell, can be completely destroyed by fire. And the gamekeepers have had a couple of instances that they recalled where this has caused a problem and rubbish has been left. Again, it may be all tied up in one, but they're not people, I don't think they're people that are using camper vans and motorhomes. And if you think of the issues regarding fly tipping and people misusing the national park, if there are one or more camper vans there, it's almost like having some site security, I would say. Because if somebody is going to do something that they shouldn't do, there'd be less possibility for them to do it when there's other people around. And that would be on a night. So there are lots of places still, well, I won't say lots, there are quite a few places still that you can wild camp in your camper van. I don't know how much those will last, but let's see what happens. The way to find these places is to use the app Pack for Night, is probably the best one, or use Google Earth. But please be careful, because if you now park somewhere that causes any problem or any suggestion of a problem, I would imagine the landowner would be contacting the national park and saying, get another one of those signs and stick it on there, and stick it on there, and stick it on there. But that just leads me to say thanks for watching as Rosie digs the bed up, and we'll see you on the next one. But please leave your comments below and be respectful in your comments, because this might help as part of the consultation, and you might have an idea that the national park or even some landowners or some local businesses might want to pick up. So please put the comments in there of ideas and comments about what we've talked about today. Thanks again. See you later.